Thank you so much. The topic of today's TED is around thinking outside the box. And I want to start with a thinking outside the box idea around thinking outside the box, because there's this assumption that runs through us that conventional thinking is therefore bad and thinking outside the box is inherently something good. To think outside the box is to throw off the shackles of convention, to step away from it, and it devalues conventional thinking. Conventional thinking exists for a very good reason. Conventional wisdoms and conventional thought patterns and conventions in culture come from doing things again and again and again, finding that they work and therefore adapting that. That's a good and healthy thing. And people who are intelligent with conventional thinking and conventional approaches are often highly successful in working either independently or with others. But there's a trap. The trap is, it's also, once you get used to it, the easiest way to go about things. And that's where we fall into the need not to fall into conventional unthinking. That's our challenge. Conventional thinking is not a problem, but failing to address perspectives and ideas, approaches and beliefs that we've taken on so much at the core of ourselves that we've forgotten that they're even there. That's where we need to challenge ourselves. And from my point of view, thinking outside the box is actually the process of realizing that those assumptions are there and overcoming them. It's not always easy, and I'll steal the phrase that my predecessor here was using of paying the toll to cross the boundary into the world of being outside your comfort zone and thinking outside the box. Now, to demonstrate this, some of the people who rely most on and therefore have the best understanding of fundamental assumptions and of thinking outside the box are actually magicians. So I'm going to do, right here on stage, a magic trick. And in breach of all conventions, I'm going to show you how it works. Now, to do this, I mentioned to Jihan before, one of our faithful organizers, that I'd asked her to come up on stage, and I will actually beckon her out. Yeah, she was like, "What? You need me to come up here? Come on, Jihan." She was like, "What do you want me to do?" I'm not telling you. I'm not very good with that. You were the one who came up with the thinking outside the box. You've got to be comfortable enough to come outside your comfort zone. You're here now. Okay, so we're going to do one of the oldest tricks in the world. It's a very, very simple trick. It's a lovely little trick. Okay, we're going to do the whole pick a card, any card. Okay, no, don't, let me see. Now, you are in fact the founder of the Psychic Society around the place. Yes, sorry? The Skeptic Society, yes. And I'm going to prove, in fact, that you have psychic abilities. Okay, she's like, dude, you are so not going to prove that I have psychic ability. I want you to stare up at the screen. Okay, I'm going to give you a nice blank screen to work with. There we go, nice blank screen. Okay, so I want you on this nice blank screen, I want you to take an image of what that card is, and I want you to project it up on the screen. Okay, you ready? Let's hope that works. Is that your card? Yes, okay, congratulations, she's done it. She has presented. So there is absolutely no doubt, since she chose the card at random, that she in fact has psychic abilities, correct? Not so much, she's still not with me so much on this entire thing. Because, of course, the trick relies on us making a fundamental assumption. There's no way, since she chose the card at random, that it was possible for me to know in advance what card she was actually going to pick. Unless, of course, I was sneaky and made a deck of cards entirely out of Queen of Spades, which is precisely what I did. Thank you very much for your... The trick works with a simple assumption. You've been dealing for so long with a regular deck of cards that even when she looked at it face down, mentally she created an image in her head of what was underneath. And the rest of the trick ran on her not challenging that assumption. To think outside the box doesn't mean dealing with the big things. It actually means dealing with the little things that lie at the heart of the soul of what we do. Nobody will teach you more about unconventional thinking, challenging fundamental assumptions, and thinking outside the box than children. I have two children, Emma, who's 8, Rebecca, who's 6. And they are, of course, as children are, completely different from one another. Both are exceedingly bright. I'm told that independently, that's not just me. Okay? Now, in the ways that they are bright, Emma is highly bright, loves convention, loves knowing what the rules are, loves following it, develops it, expands, highly creative, but loves knowing what the framework of the rules are. Rebecca, in stark contrast, not so much. So, often what you find is when you are dealing with unconventional people, people who challenge fundamental assumptions, you are occasionally outside of your comfort zone, and occasionally it's easy to understand a person who is conventional, and therefore not as easy to understand, and therefore reject the ideas and the approaches and the answers given by someone who is not conventional. And I'll give you an extremely simple idea. In one of their activity books, they were doing a spot the difference puzzle. The spot the difference puzzle was very straightforward. The first one had the person juggling 5 balls. Second one, easy enough to spot the difference. I asked the children to identify the difference. Both of them did. Wonderful. Okay. Then I gave them a pen and asked them to change the image so that they were the same, so that there was no difference. Emma, of course, does what I do. Rebecca, of course, decides to erase one of the 5 balls. It's a perfectly valid answer, and it's completely right. But it's not what 95% of the people would do, and therefore it takes you a second to hold yourself back from correcting it and forcing a correct answer into the conventional answer. That's the essence of what thinking outside the box is celebrating the conventional answers are good and worthy and not the only way to be right. We fall very early into this idea of what right and wrong is, and there's one right answer and one wrong answer. And one of my personal heroes in that is Isaac Asimov. Most of you might know him, if you do know him, as a science fiction writer, but he's also one of my favorite science writers and one of the great thinkers, actually, of the 20th century. And he wrote a book in an essay called The Relativity of Wrong, in which he addressed the idea that from a very early age we get this wrong thinking idea in our head that there's a right way and a wrong way to go about things. So, he gave the very simple example. Okay? He said, the teacher asked the children to come up and say, okay, I want you to write sugar on the board. Straightforward. First child writes S-U-G-E-R. Next one writes S-U-G-A-R. Ask another child come up. Write sugar. Another one comes up. Last child comes up. Apparently having a very interesting recess period before they got into school. His question was this: which one of these are right and which one of these are wrong? If you stick with conventional thinking, when the teacher asked the students to come up, in her head there was a right answer, being the second one. And yet several of the other answers demonstrate a knowledge and understanding of what sugar is that transcends simply being able to spell it. Some are close and some are just like completely out to lunch. So the idea of what a right answer is lies at the heart of what we need to challenge. So let's do a little exercise together, and I will actually do this as an interactive thing with the audience. You have a small enough audience and close enough to be able to pull this off. So here is our math question. 2 plus 2 equals. I would like people to call out from the audience an answer other than 4, and yet that is also correct. I'll start. 2 plus 2 equals a whole number. Anybody else have an answer for me of what 2 plus 2 could equal? 22. 22, thank you. Let's just push the digits together. Anybody else? 2 plus 2 equals 3 plus 1. What was another one over here? 2. 2. Why 2? 1, 2, 1, 2 is 2 2s. Okay. He's tallying the 2s. That equals 2 lots of 2. Nice. Anybody else? A fish. I like you. We're going to talk later on. Why a fish? You're creating an image by inverting 1, 2 onto the other one and making the fish simple. Oh, I should do these talks more often. Okay, an even number would be, a positive number would also be answered. Okay, and we can go on and on and on with this exercise and realize that there are answers that show a greater understanding of what is on the board that transcends what a small child would be able to do if they were left to this. And yet we've come up with creative ideas that expand on that. Why? Because we start on the assumption that there is a way to do it. A conventional way to do it was accepted as the right way, but rejecting the idea that it's only the right way. It's also sometimes we're presented with things that go, well, that's just wrong. Is that wrong? No? 9 a.m., 5 hours from now, 2 p.m. Everything has to be taken in context. Everything had to be understood and thought about as not just the first way that you look at things, the first way that you see things, the first way that you approach things. Science has been the evolution of getting things righter rather than getting things right. We go back, the world is flat. One of the points that Dr. Asimov was making is it's very easy to incorrectly say, no, that's silly, the world is not flat, the world is round. And that's not actually true in most meaningful senses. If you build a house, do you take the curvature of the earth into account when you're designing the foundation for your house? No. When I went on Trip Calculator to calculate the distance back to my home city in Australia, I was like, well, that can't be right because the distance it calculated was actually larger than the diameter of the earth. It wasn't taking into account the straight line, it was just taking into account, it was treating the world as being flat. For the most practical purposes that we exist for in life, we treat the world as being completely flat. It's only in exceptional and normally scientific purposes that we actually treat the world as being round. But we go, no, we understand the world is round. Well, as Dr. Asimov also pointed out, well, that's not actually exactly true either because the Earth spins. And even though it's relatively solid on the outside, it's actually mostly liquid on the inside, which means it bulges at the middle. It's an oblate spheroid. Wonderful term. And even then, it's got peaks and valleys and ridges and deep ocean trenches and everything else. So it's easy for us to say, no, the world is not flat, the world is round, because it's easier to deal with simple conventional thinkings. It's just not the only way to go about things that is actually right. We can view the world in a lot of different ways that all make sense and are all right and all have value. It's very easy to look at this and go, well, no, that is actually an absolutely incorrect map of the world. I'm looking at where Canada is right now, and right now I could apparently drive across to Morocco. I'm relatively sure that if I drove down to Pali Beach and kept on going, I would not hit Morocco. I would have a lot of problems actually getting to Morocco. Is it accurate? Sure. It's just 3 million years out of date. What you're looking at is the supercontinent that all the other continents eventually migrated out. We tend to freeze things in time, that the way things are now are the way they always have been and the way they always will be. 300 million years from now, it will look nothing like the map that you are familiar with. What is familiar is often right, but therefore not the only way that is right. And in celebration of this, I'll actually use one of the slides that I use in my regular presentations. A lot of people find this a very unsettling slide. Could everybody please point up? Are you pointing north? If I asked you to start driving north, would you drive up the side of the auditorium and into the sky? No, of course not. Okay? And yet, for all of your life, you would have very probably only seen a world map that was a Mercator map with north at the top. Why? Why? Because Ptolemy and the Greeks did it first, and then the Europeans continued and the Egyptians did it. So where did they naturally put themselves on the map? At the top and in the middle. That's why they look like that. And yet, if you look at this as a map, it works perfectly fine. If I asked you to find exactly where we're standing now, you can isolate on the map quite easily. If you could navigate a ship, you could use this quite easily to navigate yourself around the world. It works. It is completely functional. It's just that your instinct is naturally to reject it simply because your whole life you've seen things one way, and that way has become right. Thinking outside the box is the process of letting go of assumptions so fundamental, things so familiar, that you've never been asked to imagine them any other way than the way that you know them. Of course it's uncomfortable. Of course there's a toll to pay. But it is an amazing world. In my role, I get to meet people who come from literally across the world. And it's easy to think of the world as simply a composition of nations. It's certainly not true. But the one thing that I find is that each one of them have customs and cultures that are their conventions, their conventional thinkings. Dealing successfully across cultures comes from the realization that cross-cultural conflict arises from each of them in that side by side, but facing each other way, unable to step out of their circle of convention, their circle of what was right, and see that there is anything valid in any other way but what they've known. In order to be successful, not just dealing across cultures, but to approach and take our societies and our culture and our world into the new levels that we're hoping to bring it to, it's absolutely imperative that you celebrate conventional thinking, see that for what it is worth, and it is worth a tremendous amount. Embrace it, but know it and understand it, so that when you see that there are challenges, that you know it well enough not to be mired in it, not to be locked down in it, but instead to take that step outside the box that in reality is to reject everything that is at the basis of what you naturally operate on unthinkingly, and deal with the rest of the world. Your ability to deal with the world outside comes from your ability to understand, manage, and step beyond the world that is inside. And that will define your ability to be success at surprising yourself, surprising everybody around you, and surprising your world. Thank you.